Before we get into building our argument, I think it's useful to figure out what we need to argue and perhaps more importantly, what we don't need to argue. And this means we need to sort through status quo and burden of proof. So to begin with, status quo. Now, this term is bandied about quite a bit, and for argumentation, the status quo is simply the existing state of affairs. It's what's currently in place. Let's say you want your office to support a new family leave policy. Maybe right now, mothers get 2 weeks of paid leave after giving birth, but fathers get nothing. They get nothing. Okay, well, that policy of mothers getting leave and fathers not, that policy is a status quo. So if you want to change it, you're arguing against the status quo. Now, if you think the policy is totally fine, you're arguing in defense of the status quo. And in this sense, status quo is neither good nor bad. It's a descriptive term. Oh, and you might hate fathers, so that's your own issue that you got to deal with. But why bother to know this stuff about status quo? Because it helps us figure out burden of proof. This is what your argument needs to accomplish. In legal cases, many countries formally place the burden of proof on the prosecution. All right, we call this sort of the presumption of innocence. We assume the defendant is innocent until the prosecution convinces us otherwise. Many legal systems even go further and identify exactly what that burden of proof looks like. So in criminal cases, this is often beyond a reasonable doubt. That's a deliberately high standard. These cases, criminal cases, might revoke someone's freedom, and we take that pretty seriously. Now, in civil cases, the standard is often lower, preponderance of evidence. That's more probable than not. We're not talking about locking people up in these cases, so the burden of proof is lighter. In the U.S., we had a famous court case, O.J. Simpson, famous football player. He was accused of murdering his wife and her friend, and in that trial, he was found not guilty of murder in the first degree. Now, that was the criminal trial. Afterwards, he was taken to court by the families of the deceased and found liable for their wrongful deaths. That was a civil trial. A lot of things were different in those two cases, but one of the driving factors for why he was found not guilty but responsible was due to the different burdens of proof in criminal and civil cases. Well, that's great, but we're not in a law class. Why are we talking about this? In argumentation, we don't have such a clean standard. We don't have a judge presiding over our debates, but the standard we should aim for is those who assert should prove. If you are arguing for a change to the status quo, you bear the burden of proof. That doesn't mean one is easier than the other. It totally depends on the case. If this studio were to suddenly catch fire, I would argue we should vacate. That's a challenge to the status quo. That's not normally what we do. We wait until the video's over. But seeing as the alternative is a fiery death, I think I can make my case, right? I can satisfy my burden of proof. It's usually not that simple, though. I heard a story from a rhetoric professor, Christopher Johnstone, a number of years ago. Now, he had left academia and he was serving on a city council. It's a small college town, and the city council dealt with a lot of zoning issues. Questions like, who could build what where, right? So one time there was a husband and wife developer team, and they wanted to build a small condo complex in the middle of a bunch of single-family houses. Now, in order to do that, they had to petition the city council to let them build there. Now, the neighbors didn't want this condo complex in their backyard. They thought it would lower property values. So the husband and wife developer team are standing in front of the council asking to build the condos. Councilman Johnstone says to the neighbors, the neighbors are worried that this condo is going to lower their property values. Can you show that it won't? And then the developers respond very smartly, no, but can they show that it will? They don't have to. You need to show that it won't cause more damage. You have the burden of proof. If they're wrong, nothing changes. If you're wrong, bad stuff happens. And that's why we say those who assert should prove. Getting this sorted out can immediately help you in day-to-day discussions. Do you have the burden of proof, or is it on the other side? And once we know this, we can use stock issues to build our case.